This is Klayton, aka Celldweller, Circle of Dust, and Scandroid, and you are geeking out to Gear Gods. I have been making music for many years, and my first project, Circle of Dust, was heavy industrial music in the 90s, and guitar was a big part of that sound. It was pretty violent music, and was fun to make, but I didn't know much as a producer. So here I am 20 plus years later, and I finally got to buy the rights back to my first 5 albums, so I re-released them. And it got me thinking, if I were to produce that sound now that I know so much more about production, what would that sound like? And that became an experiment that I jumped into and ended up resulting in a full-length, brand new Circle of Dust album called Machines of Our Disgrace, which is out December 9th. So let's look at a session for Humanarchy, which is one of the songs on the album. It's on the heavier side of things, so I'm going to show you a little about my drum production, guitar production, etc. So here we are in the session for Humanarchy, and this is a little bit what it sounds like. This is not mastered. This is just kind of the final arrangement in Cubase, but this is a rough idea of what it sounds like. So obviously there's a lot more to the song than that, but there's a little clip from the intro. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. I was a drummer. It was my first instrument, and I love the drums, but I also love the sound of a programmed drum machine, and that was a big part of my sound in the 90s, is drum samples and drum machines with heavy riffs over them and some screaming and samples from movies and chaos and noise. And so I wanted to kind of recreate that idea in the modern day. So I ended up using some drum samples, specifically because I wanted that sound where they were just one-shot drums, but I have more live-sounding cymbals, so the crashes and the hi-hats and things like that make the track feel a little more live. Here's a clip of what the drums sound like. Of course, I had to sneak a little 90s kind of like hip-hop loop underneath it just because I wanted to. So a big question for everyone probably is guitars. What type of guitars? What sounds? And I have like a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier head. I have a Soldano SP77 head as well. And I use them occasionally. Sometimes I end up just cutting guitars virtually and then going back and reamping. But in this case, I ended up using a friend of mine plugin who is Joey Sturgis, and he has his Tone Forge series of plugins, and there's a Menace head, a guitar amplifier plugin that I use for this track because I think it sounds great. So here is an example of those guitars using the Tone Forge plugin, which is here. So as you can see, the controls, there's not a lot actually to control in this plugin, and that's actually what I like about it. It doesn't get as complicated as some other plugins that you have a million options and effects and things like that. This thing just kind of sounds good right out of the gate. I ended up using my Gibson Les Paul primarily across this album because I can detune that. I've got some extra special strings. I'm tuning down to B flat ordinarily. There's some tracks on this album I think I tuned down to F and G, and that's kind of fun to do just to see if I can do it. So as I said, I was a drummer. Tama was my weapon of choice when I was a drummer in the 80s and 90s. I don't live drum much anymore because I don't need to. But I have a Tama kit. I have my Gibson Les Paul guitar. I have a Line 6 Variax. I have actually a cheap Epiphone guitar that my brother gave me, and I keep that tuned standard to E, and I use that actually quite a bit because there's a certain sound that it has. I play $20 guitars that sound good, so at the end of the day it doesn't really matter. As long as what you're getting from the instrument sounds good, use it. So I could be here all day walking you through this session and kind of showing you every nook and cranny of it, but I feel like you might be way more interested in walking around the studio and looking at some gear. So let's go do that. So this is my main room where I do all my producing, and you're going to look around and see a lot of stuff. You're going to be like, well, what does this have to do with metal? I'm going to tell you. So I've got this pretty extensive modular setup, and these are all modules. They're individual sound makers and processors. For instance, I've got a bunch of distortion-based things here, and that's where it really starts to shine with what I've done for the Circle of Dust record. Like there's some distortions here you're not going to necessarily get out of a pedal because they think about distortion in a different way. And there's some things here that are going to scream at you louder than your mom when she caught you with that Playboy magazine. So here's a collection of my distortion pedals and sound processors. And I've got these all wired into my patch bay here so that I have direct connect from my output of my guitar into any of these boxes, which are numbered, through the patch bay, boom, boom, they patch up really quickly, and then I can get them right into the box or into an amp. So under a pile of more modules and these old analog synthesizers, I had my Celldweller preamp. And that's going into this Moss valve amp, which isn't really great, but I've had it since the 90s when I could barely afford to buy it. So for nostalgic reasons, I keep it and I use it. Sounds decent. So this is what I call my keyboard room because it has a lot of keyboards in it, and I use this room occasionally when I'm working on projects where this stuff fits. I also have a custom Pintech drum kit here, trigger-based drum kit that I use occasionally to trigger live sounds and synthetic ones. I also have a station here, another workstation for when I have an assistant or if I'm producing in this room, I end up using that. So in the bass department, I have an Ibanez Sound Gear bass, which I've just had for a long time, and it kind of like the low end on it, which is kind of what a bass does. And then I have the Fender 6, which is the pawn shop bass by Fender, which is a recreation of the old Fender 6. And I use this sometimes as a bass and more times like a guitar with kind of a lower baritone sound to it. I got myself a Line 6 Variax because I actually use this quite often, not to just emulate other types of guitars, but really to do weird things with tuning. So that's something you can do with software actually, and create these tuning presets that allow me to flip tunings on the fly and do some pretty cool things. So for acoustic duties, I've got a Takamine here that I use for that, and I've got a few of these Schecter Diamond Series guitars that I actually used a lot live. This was kind of the guitar I used during my live shows. This is my vocal booth, and it is dead as a doornail in here, which is a good thing when you're trying to track vocals. So here is where I scream and sing like a banshee. I'm running my Sennheiser M149 through a vintage Neve 1073 preamp, an LA2A compressor, and into Cubase. Here's the drum room, but as you notice, there's not a whole lot of drums because I haven't had a need to actually do that much anymore. So it's kind of cool. It's another production area with a guitar isolation cabinet over here. So thanks to Gear Gods for putting this video up, and for you for watching. Hope you learned something new. Check out the brand new Circle of Dust album, Machines of Our Disgrace, out December 9th, and dig into the Celldweller catalog because you might dig that too. Until next time, this is Klayton signing off.